of the other things that I am now is I'm a member of the part-time member of what's called the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, set up by the federal government last year. We are just about to, next week, submissions are closed for looking at the rates of pay for drivers and owner-drivers in certain sectors in the country's economy. So clearly I'm not here to endorse or to criticise at least any of Jan's observations in her book. But I have seen some of the sort of childish criticisms that, not criticisms, but observations of a book. I mean, when I spoke to Jan, and she is, as I said, a forceful personality, and reading her book, she wasn't seeking the meaning of life. She wasn't seeking the secret of the universe. She wasn't trying to discover her inner self. She wasn't searching for God. She's not an evangelist. She wasn't trying to replicate Che Guevara's motorcycle diaries. She wasn't trying to be like Jack Kerouac on the road. She was doing what hasn't been, in a lot of ways, done particularly by people in the road transport industry, and that is to give in the right way, a sober, clinical, unemotional observation of the work of professional drivers in the country. And her experiences behind the wheel with these men mainly have led to Jan making the observations that she has. Yeah, I mean, let me just say this, that Jan doesn't have a barrow to push. She's not trying to sell a magazine. She's not trying to sell a journal. She is trying to give to a number of people in the country, people that might be interested in the book, a snapshot of what men, mainly men, do in this very underrated but highly important profession. A profession that is necessary to the economy and the security of our country. The book portrays a difficult life, a hard and dangerous life. There's no glamour, there's no frills. But again, since demand for overnight freight started to take over in this country from the 70s onward, and also the competition with rail, it has become more and more important for our country, and it has expanded. This is an important commentary on that wonderful profession. Unfortunately, often ratbags get portrayed in the media, or unfortunately too, the interests of men and women in this industry get hijacked by people in the right. What I'd like to say finally is that Jan did thousands of kilometres. I asked her how many kilometres she did so she could compare herself to Che Guevara and Jack Kerouac, but she doesn't know. But she has done these thousands of kilometres, and she wants to, in this study, bring to the attention of people who are prepared to read this book how bright the men and women are in this profession, or calling. It's possibly a better way to refer to it. And she's done a grand job, and I hope we all welcome this observation and commentary, because I'm not sure that anybody's done it in an unemotional term before. Thank you, Jack.
You see, I might be forceful, but somehow I know the right people to drag into my life. Because that launching of my book could only be described as very, very eloquent, and I deeply appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yes, I will, yeah. Yeah, Arthur's just saying, Stephen's from Melbourne, so it's a reflection of his support of me that he spent the time here with us. So thanks. Yeah. I feel like I've done well though. I've rewarded him with 3 donated bottles of red wine. But they are from New England, so they're really good. Look, I think it's really interesting that there isn't any union people here or policymakers or politicians. You know, this is a group of people who are my friends, who are supporting my work, and I appreciate that. The fact that there aren't people who may, as independents, or, you know, come from institutions, is reflected in the way I did the work. I'm not a member of an institution. I'm an independent researcher, which means I put my hand up, I decided to write a book, I self-funded it, I turned up in people's lives and said, I'm writing a book about truckies, I think you should know about it. And that reflects the audience. If I was a member of the TWU, they'd be here. If I was a member of the infrastructure, federal government's infrastructure, they'd be here. But I'm not. And I don't feel any less of the occasion because they're not at all. I don't feel any less about it. I can't do this work without friends. You know, there's a woman in the audience who came to Tamworth to support my launch there, who gave me money when I ran out of it to keep working on this project. That's personal funding at its best, you know, that's a loan. You know, and that's actually how I've completed the work. It's almost how I did the research. You know, I went into the field and through word of mouth caught rides with people who let me into their trucks. They didn't know me at all. So the audience here this evening actually reflects how the work was done and the work itself. And to be really honest, I'm very proud of that. Really proud, and so thank you for coming. I do want to talk about the book. I like lecturing actually, so you're going to lecture. I'm going to take my jacket off because hopefully the photos are finished. I want to talk about the book because I wrote it and I'm passionate about it. I want to start by reading a poem. This is the first poem I wrote. A Truckie's Life. Trucks and vibrations, bassoon noises as they change down the gears, a rhythm, a motion, a moving downward. A slow grinding, a slow pace. No, not a snail. More like a gigantic beast that with its warm belly caresses the bitumen, moving into its own grace. A spirit of comfort, a connection with the road. You're on top, you sit, your round belly slightly hunched back. Your hands tap the wheel. Your feet planted on the floor. Cruise control allows you to mix the beat a little with your toes. The boots are gloves. They are tight, your skin, your leather feet. Your shoes are you, your shorts, t-shirt. The recent yellow-orange safety top becomes part of you. The truck, your home, your refuge, and your whip becomes your foe. The only ones who understand the love and connection, the hate of the stress and the anger of the constant motion is that mate you see, passing you through the glass. The radio rattles, the light bleeps. There's one up the road, mate, behind the bend. Copy, mate, over and out. I'm just going to tell you briefly about each chapter. Don't worry, I won't go on like a school teacher forever. I'll just give you what I think is important in each element. Chapter 1 is a conversations with truckies, and it just introduces the reader to the content in the book. It's not the nitty-gritty, it's like a bit of an overall without being boring. So it's like it sort of starts to put you in the seat of a truck. Chapter 2 again is about a day in the life, which is more about the regulations, the timeframes, the stress, the economics of a driver who's managing an owner business, a small owner-operated business. The culture of regulation was enormously difficult to write. I did 21 interviews that were taped, so put the tape wherever and they speak into it. I record it, I transcribe it. The other 3 were note tapes. They didn't want to be recorded, so I took notes. And that sounds like a very contained process, but in fact it's not, because it means I went back via phone. What did you mean when you said this? I'm not quite sure what I'm doing with that. Did you mean this? And with some of those drivers, that continued until the book was published and released. So these men did make a commitment to the work and believed it needed to be done. The difficult element around a culture of regulation is the language. It's like you're going into a specialised field and they talk a special language, and I couldn't work it out at all. And also I'm appalling at maths. I'm just appalling. And so, you know, there's logbooks and there's maths and there's distance and there's speed and there's weight and there's emotion. And then also there's a reader who has to be able to read it to make sense. And so that is the difficulty of going into cultures that you don't know anything about and then trying to relay what's being said to people who know even less than I do. I do believe I've done it to the best of my ability. I would like to tell you two things that I think are crucial about the regulations that apply not only to trucking, although that's only what I'm only going to talk about, but as I do, you will think of things in your own workforce. GPSs are now used in trucks. So the minute the ignition's turned on, a little light comes on, and the driver is told GPS initiated. He then gets told how long it will take him to do a certain distance. And that light and that computer is the whole time talking to the driver by light in the dark of the screen. So there it is, there it is, there it is. The problem with GPSs are, and I've lectured on this at Cambridge and Leicester and Sydney University and all the other places, but they're not truckies, so they're a few steps removed, is that GPSs are like having a heartbeat. You know, if you're working, it's on. And but if you stop, it stops. So I used to live on the Central Coast, which means the F3 would have accidents, and every now and again a truck driver goes down one of the sides of the cliffs. And unfortunately, people get very upset because it delays the traffic, sometimes for 2 days, which is, you know, really awful for commuters. But the person down the side of the cliff is actually a dot on the screen that shows the truck is stopped. What I find appalling is there's no two-way communication. There's none. There's a logistics manager in an office watching bleeps on screens. Stopped, start, braked, slowed. And they call it controlling the industry. We do need controls in the industry, but I think it'd be great if I was a truck driver and I was in need that the satellite dishes that done with GPS could actually provide a two-way communication, and that person could ring and say, my legs are trapped under the front of the truck and I need some assistance here because I'm dying, and there isn't that capacity. And the other place where it's very useful, and we have police in the audience here, some of my lovely buddies, is that truck drivers can use GPSs to switch them on and off. So if a police officer decides, which they do, to sit at the bottom of a hill while the big tons of truck come down and the speed limit is 100 and he's doing 106, he can pull him over or she can pull him over. Excuse about sexist language, you'll have to believe I'm not sexist. But we have a he driver and we have a he policeman, you know, egos, all the rest of it, and they're going to pin the truck. Now, trucks will know, because they're talking to CB, that there's police officers there. So they will try to abide by the rules. Partly because they're going to get pinned if they don't. So a police officer can pull that truck over and say, you're speeding. And the truck driver can turn his GPS off. And at that point, the logistic manager is supposed to be watching the screen and see the truck is stopped. And that's supposed to initiate some sort of contact with the driver. On some occasions, it depends what the circumstances are. But that's all irrelevant, because what the driver can actually do is ask for a record of time, date and place and speed. And so he can provide evidence in court to the time and date about what speed he was actually doing. So it gives the driver some power over law enforcement that are actually pinning drivers for things they're not doing. And I think that's useful. And I like, as an intellectual, sometimes, I like that notion of technology being utilised by the worker and the worker just not being subjected to it. I think it's brilliant. But at the moment, there's far too much subjecting the driver to the technology with no two-way interaction. And, you know, God help us, because, I mean, people were talking about this 20, 30, 40, I don't know, 60 years ago, I don't know the literature, but a long time ago about over-surveillance. And we certainly have industries at the moment that are in the process of using this type of technology. Yeah, it has its benefits, but it most definitely has its drawbacks. The next chapter is 4 about families. And this is because it's a workplace where people are a long time away, and it isn't how all of us live. You know, if a child breaks an arm, you know, a man can be rung or a woman can be rung at work, and they can go home and they can help with that child. Truck drivers are not in that position. They're not there for major events. My silly way of testing that was to ask drivers who were in their 50s, 60s and 70s where they were when their children were born. I wanted to know what their reaction to that question actually was, and they could tell me, all of them. Each child, who were now 25, 30, whatever, with grandchildren, where they were born, what the events around that birth were, but much more importantly, where they were and why. So, you know, my baby was born in Walgett Hospital, and I remember I was at Cairns, and I had to be there because the job was worth a lot of money because I had this bill coming in. And I'm not sure, for me, that's in the day of city people wanting their husbands with them, you know, having babies. You understand what I'm saying. There's this terrible distance in communication, in intimacy, in tenderness, that's taken away by the workplace. And it's a choice to work there, so, but I felt it was important to write about it. And so the next chapter is the sex chapter, because when I'm tired, people say, why'd you write the book? And I said, oh, I wrote about sex, drugs and rock and roll because that's sort of funny. But chapter 5 is about sex. And the real reason that that was written was because of this disconnection from family. What do men do for touch and intimacy and feeling and connection? And so that this chapter goes quite into the use of prostitutes. Now, I'd like to make the point at this important point. There's this sort of dialogue in the community about, unfortunately, in 2013, you know, that working girls are still 3rd class, 4th class, 5th class citizens, whatever they are. Working girls or men. What I found just refreshing, and only found, was this deep respect for sex workers in the industry. And it was refreshing, and it was modern, and it wasn't conservative or archaic or judgmental. And these men would say, you know, prostitutes are doing this work to buy uniforms for their kids. And prostitutes are doing this as workers. And I'm a worker, they're a worker. And there's quite a lot of detail around the relationships and how they work, if we can call them relationships. I'm not sure, you know, I discussed that as well. I would actually like to do a lot more work, if I do get a job at university and get some funding, which is highly unlikely, on that connection between prostitutes and truckies and the economy and how those relationships feed into each other, and also the need for people to look at things respectfully around unemployment and people just needing the money. I think it'd be nice if we could do that. Illegal drug use. This chapter is very, very important, and I think the most important message that comes out of it is I try to correct this idea. Unfortunately, amphetamine is called speed, and these guys are driving trucks. So if you're driving a truck and you're using amphetamine, you must be speeding. This is what people think when they don't understand what drugs actually do, what drugs do. Amphetamine doesn't encourage you to do 160 down a highway. What amphetamine does is it keeps you awake, which means you can drive longer and further than without it. But the main purpose of using amphetamine is because it makes you feel optimistic about delivering the product that you're carrying. Now, we all know truckies in the media are highlighted as being evil buggers who run around and speed and, you know, run us all off the road. To be quite honest, and I believe this is a fact, they're in the minority. The ones who are doing that are people who do not know how to use amphetamine. So they're young drivers, they're uninitiated, they're not habitual drug users. I'm not speaking in any value judgment here, as Stephen Hutchins introduced me. I'm not making moral judgments, I'm just reflecting that this drug provides for these men who are long-term habitual speed users who actually drive at 120 or 110 or whatever the speed limit is, for longer periods of time with a sense of optimism about doing your job, which is delivering the product and getting paid. So in fact, it's not comparable to a Friday afternoon going out in the piss because you had a hard week at work. It's not quite like that. But if you've got someone who's having a nibble every afternoon after work, you know, a few whiskies, and they feel a bit better and it helps them get to work the next day, it's very similar to that, except of course it's illegal, very illegal. And the perception of it is, so the cowboy is actually someone who doesn't know how to use the drug, and so they're actually pumping themselves full of it a bit and driving erratically and causing deaths. And I'm not for 1 second condoning it or saying, that that's okay, not at all. But I wanted to open the door about how the drug is actually being used, so that people understood more about it. Not to be sympathetic necessarily, but because, as owner-driver have reported, I'm advocating the introduction of rehabs and people at the union, asking the union to actually look at habitual speed use as something that needs to be addressed. Now, the very dangerous issue with speed is if you don't keep your levels up, you crash, which means you do crash. Again, the words. A crash means that you're at a satellite or you're actually driving and you fall sideways or fall into the steering wheel and you're blacked out. And that happens because you haven't maintained your level of speed, and so your body is actually withdrawing, and it doesn't withdraw as like alcohol, you get shakes or you can have a seizure actually, but speed actually just drops you off the face of reality, bang, and that is extremely dangerous because it's unpredictable and you don't know what's happening. So the drug culture is a very deep thing that needs a lot more work and a lot more understanding than what's being presented in the media, and and I'm hoping that the book addresses that. So in conclusion, I want to read another poem, which is actually a bit of an indulgence, to be honest, because people never get to read poems in public, and I bloody want to. And I was supposed to go and be a very good girl at a writing course and present this. Anyway, I read one. I was supposed to do something, and of course I didn't. I read a poem and I wasn't successful at that course. I decided I failed, so I haven't grown up yet. Okay. This is in response to a driver who said something to me, and it's the first poem in chapter 6. Driving north. Driving north, moving